Hi everyone, I'm Gertie and I am so excited to introduce to you July's Patreon project, the Ginger Sailor Pants. Now you all have been asking for sailor pants for quite a while now, so I've been really excited to do this pattern for you. And as always, we've given you a lot of options. But first, let's talk a little bit about the inspiration. So when I think sailor pant, I go to 30s, Ginger Rogers, Follow the Fleet, that 30s nautical style. But of course we see sailor pants in almost every decade, so there's a lot of different directions you can go with this pattern stylistically. So we've given you a lot of different options here, so let me just walk you through the different ways you can make this pattern. First of all, make it as just a separate, right, to mix with all your other charm pattern separates. I'm wearing the full length version. We've also given you a cropped length, very on trend right now, and then a hot pant length. So you have 3 different lengths to choose from. Now, the pants that I'm wearing and these black ones that Susie modeled, these have a fully functional sailor flap in the front. Okay, so this is a full and buttonhole situation. And you can see there's a horizontal seam here that is accented with some top stitching. So for this version, if you're going to do that functional flap, you're going to have a flat waistband in the back. We've got our little patch pockets here, which look adorable, especially with the contrast top stitching. But we also wanted to give you the option to do a non-functional sailor flap. Now, why would you want this, you ask? Couple reasons. First of all, you may hate sewing buttonholes. I know a lot of people do. They want the look of a sailor flap, but they don't want to go through all the trouble of sewing the buttonholes. And then you can get some gapping sometimes. Some people don't like that. They want a very streamlined look, right? So if that's what you want, we have given you the option to do a purely decorative flap in the front where this is stitched down. And the buttons, of course, are just decorative. Now, in that case, you're going to need to put a closure in the back. So we have given you the option to do a lap zipper in the back, and we've given you a second waistband option that has an overlap, or more an underlap really, for a hook and bar closure here. Okay, so that's the hot pant version with the decorative flap. Now, the other reason you might want a non-functioning flap is the interchangeability of this pattern. So we have made this interchangeable with our L series so that you can make jumpsuits and rompers. So we've given you an example here where we did the decorative flap, sewed the pants together at the waistline with the L'Amour bodice and the Loretta band. So a few interchanging patterns here, and the Dorothy Bolero. So in this case, you wouldn't want this to be a functional flap because it's just going to get sewn at the waistline anyway. So we've done the decorative flap here. And then in the back, you can see there's a lap zipper that goes all the way to the top of the bodice. And we've done the patch pockets on all our versions because they're so cute. Okay, so you have a lot of options with the length options and then the interchangeability available to you with this pattern. I hope you can see that there is so much you can do with this. So let's go ahead and get started talking about the pattern and supplies. Okay, let's walk through the pattern pieces for the Ginger Sailor Pant. So we've minimized these so you can see them all in one place and really understand how the pattern comes together. So first we have piece number 1, and this is the pant front. Looks a lot like any other pant front, except that it has this cutout here, which forms the sailor flap shape. You can also see you have the button markings here, as well as some horizontal line markings. And these are to give you those different options for the lengths. So this would be the hot pant length, and this would be your cropped length, and then your full length. Then we have, let's talk about the pieces that form the sailor flap. So next, piece 3 is essentially a facing for the pant front. It finishes this little cutout area here and gets turned in so that you have a finished edge on the sailor flap. Next, piece 2, the pants side front, fills in that area behind the cutout to complete the pant front. Now, a couple things I want you to look at on the side pant front are there's a line right here, and this is a cut-on facing, okay? So you're gonna fold this in, and that's gonna form this underlap where the buttons get sewn if you're doing the functional option, like so. Okay, so those are your pant front pieces. Piece 4 is your pant back, pretty self-explanatory. You have a dart and some placement lines for your patch pocket in the back. Piece 5 is your patch pocket. You're going to cut 2 of those. And then let's talk about waistband pieces, so pieces 6 through 9. We have given you 2 different options for how you can do the waistband, right? You can either do the fully functioning front sailor flap, where this actually buttons and unbuttons, and that's how you get in and out of the pants. Or you can make this a non-functioning flap, so it gets sewn up, top stitched up, and then you need to put a zipper in the back. Okay, so the reason for that is we thought you might want to have the option to not do buttonholes, first of all. Also, if you want to sew these pants together with a bodice, like the Lemoire bodice for a jumpsuit or a romper, then you wouldn't want to do a functional front. Okay, but we've given you waistband options for both. Piece 6 is the front waistband. You need to cut 2 of that and 1 interfacing, no matter which version you're making. Then let's look at piece 7. This is only for the fully functional sailor flap version. So you would just cut 4 of piece 7, 2 interfacing. If you want to do the non-functioning sailor flap, then you're going to use pieces 8 and 9. Piece 8 is the right waistband that wraps around the side here, and piece 9 is the left waistband. For both of these pieces, you would cut 2 of the waistband and 1 of the interfacing. If it seems overly complicated, it is a little complicated, but just know which pieces you need to use for the version you're making. And the reason for it is that if you're doing a zipper in the back with a waistband, there needs to be an underlap, right? If you've sewn like our Stanwyck skirt, our Loretta shorts, you know, that's the way that we like to do waistbands in the back with a lap zipper, is that you have that 1.5 inch underlap in the back to sew your hooks and bars to for a nice clean finish. Okay, so that's why there's a difference in the pieces. So hopefully that'll help you understand why there are so many different pieces. Okay, so those are your pattern pieces. Next, we're going to talk about supplies and fabrics. Let's talk fabric and supplies. These pants were designed for woven fabrics, and we looked for things that were sort of light to medium weight. We used a lot of linen blends for the samples, and I highly recommend for a summer pant, for a sailor pant like this, you cannot go wrong with linen, or a linen rayon blend would be perfect. If you want to dress it up a little bit, you could try something like a silk matka, which we did 2 looks in silk matka, which is kind of fabulous. So if you want to go a little more elevated, silk matka is great. It has a linen-like texture to it. But then there are all sorts of other fabrics you could choose for this. If you're going into fall or winter, you could choose a wool suiting like gabardine. So just go back to that list of recommended fabrics, but just know that you're looking for light to medium weight woven fabrics, not knits. Okay, next thing you're going to be looking for is your interfacing to go on your waistband. So we used a lightweight woven interfacing, a fusible interfacing. So that's the glue side on the back. If you're doing the zipper version, you're going to want strips of fusible interfacing to stabilize the zipper opening. So we'll provide you to the link that we use, but it's just a roll of strips of interfacing, so you can actually make your own, but I like the convenience of having it on the roll like this. Okay, a few other supplies you'll need. A 7-inch zipper if you're doing the zipper back version, and that's a regular zipper, not invisible. And then buttons. So whether you're doing the functional or non-functional sailor opening, I would do buttons either way because it's just part of the look of this garment, right? So this is an opportunity to really have fun with some big, fabulous buttons. We used ones that are 1 1/8 inch wide. So you can look for things like mother of pearl. We actually found some fun nautical buttons with anchors on them. And then I had these left over from the picnic set, little flower buttons, which are really cute too. So have fun with your button shopping. Then you will also, if you're doing the zipper back version, you're going to need a hook and bar for the back waistband. And finally, just your all-purpose polyester thread. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started sewing. Okay, everyone, let's get started sewing. So first things first, all the steps you're going to see me do, these apply to both the functional and the non-functional sailor flap, okay? So all the steps are going to be the same up to a certain point, and I will warn you when we get there. But I'm going to be sewing the functional flap today, and we're using this cotton linen blend in this pretty pink color. So the first thing we're going to do is focus on the pant side front. You can see that I have serged around all the edges of this piece except for the waistline edge. And the other thing I've done on the wrong side is to apply interfacing just up to the marked line here. Okay, so you don't have to do this, but I would say if you're using a lightweight fabric, it's a good idea because this is where your buttons are going to be sewn if you're doing the functional flap. Okay, so it's nice to have a little stability for the buttons to anchor onto. All right, so the line on the pattern right here where I interfaced up to, this is called a cut-on facing or a cut-on extension. It just means that there's no seam line here, and that to form a facing, it just gets folded in. So we're going to fold it in and press flat. And the next thing we're going to do is stitch it down. And this is going to become the underlap where the buttons are anchored. So you can put a couple pins here just to hold the layers flat while we stitch. And you're going to stitch at 1.5 inches, okay? This is quite a wide underlap here for those big buttons on these pants. So my 1.5 inch mark is right here on my machine. So there we go, and that stitching will not be seen from the right side of the pant as it's worn. This is the underlap that gets hidden. Okay, so that's it for that piece for now. You're gonna do both sides, obviously. Next thing we're gonna do is the facing on the pant front. So grab your pant front piece, and then you're going to grab your pant front facing, which looks like this, sort of like an L shape. Now you're going to make sure that you have applied your interfacing to the wrong side of this. You want to add any marks, transfer any marks from the pattern, and then we also serged the outer edges here because this is unfinished on the inside of the pant. You're going to put this right sides together with your pant front and pin them along this little L shape here. Now the mark that we give you on the pattern is a circle right here, and that circle is really important for where you're going to pivot. I also like to draw in my seam allowances up to the circle just so I have a little more sense of when I'm going to need to pivot as I'm stitching. So you can draw in your seam allowances at 5/8 of an inch with a disappearing ink marker or something like that, or chalk. Okay, so we're going to sew these together at 5/8 of an inch. And I'm just using my regular 2.5 millimeter stitch length. And you can see I'm just following my marked line here, and I'm going to pivot at that circle mark. And the next steps we're going to do are the same steps you do with any facing, really. So imagine this is a neckline facing or something like that. If there is an inner corner like this, you would clip into it as close as you can without clipping through your stitching. And then you're going to grade your seam allowances. So the facing seam allowance, or the interfaced one, is going to be your shorter one. So I am trimming that to about 1/8 of an inch. And then the pant seam allowance is a little bit taller than that, so about 1/4 inch. Okay, and then just like any other facing, you can probably guess, the next thing we're going to do is understitch. So you don't need to press or anything. We'll press after we understitch. You are going to open out the facing like that. Your seam allowances need to be oriented towards the facing. And then we're going to stitch just about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line. And I'm just holding the two sides taut. There we go. And this is very interesting because we have a pivot point on our understitching. So if you've ever wondered how to do this, how to deal with this inner corner here, what you're going to do is you're going to go as far as you can to the corner, stopping with your needle down. And then you're going to lift up your presser foot, and then you have to pivot and you're understitching. So see how I just moved all the folds out of the way? And now I can continue down the other side of that L shape. You can also like stop and break your stitching at the inner corner if you prefer. But it's a fun little challenge to pivot on the understitching. Okay, so I'm going to press this from the wrong side. I'm just going to roll the facing slightly in and see how nice it looks already without even pressing it. It's the magic of understitching. So now we're going to press this flat. And we should have a nice, oops, I got a little pucker on my corner. So what you can do is I like to use a raised surface for work like this. So put it on the ham and then just press out that inner corner with a little steam. So I'll do a little more work on that, but you get the point. So you have a nice finished inner corner there. And then on the next step, we're going to put those two pieces together, the pant side front and the pant front. Okay, so now that we've done the prep work on those two pieces, the pant side front and the pant front, we're going to put them together. So take your pant front with the finished facing edge here, and you're just going to place it over the pant side front, right? So right side of the pant side front is facing up, and then this is facing down. Okay, so you have a couple marks to guide you here. There's a notch at the top of this piece to align the upper edge. There is a circle mark down here to match to the circle mark at that inner corner. And then there is a notch on the side front side seam, which aligns with the finished edge of the pant front. So what I'm focusing on here is this horizontal edge here, okay? So the next thing we're going to be doing is stitching from this corner to the edge, and this is visible top stitching. Okay, so I'm going to start stitching at this inner corner, back stitch, and then finish here. So this is really technically like an edge stitch because I'm just next to this fold here. So I'm going to start stitching back stitch. And you can see I'm just stitching right along this fold. And I'm going to back stitch at this edge too. Okay, so as you can see, I have just stitched along this edge here. And now the final thing I need to do in this step is to baste these layers together at the side seam. So you can put a pin there if you like. I am going to just use a long basting stitch just to hold these layers flat for the rest of the process. Just that little width of the facing. Okay, so now these layers are all held together, and then this is all still open, okay? And like I said, no matter which version you're doing, functional or non-functional flap, this is all the same, okay? So next we're gonna move on to the pant back. So now we are ready to focus on the pant back. So we're gonna start with the patch pocket. So grab your pocket, and the first thing you're going to want to do is interface the upper edge of the pocket, just to prevent it from stretching out over time, putting your phone in and out of your pocket. So interface that with a 1.25 inch wide strip of fusible interfacing. And then you can finish all 4 edges of the pocket. So we serged ours. Next thing you're going to do is press in the seam allowance at the top of the pocket. So 5/8 of an inch gets turned in and pressed. And now we're going to hem the upper edge of the pocket using half an inch seam allowance. And just your regular stitch length. Okay, so now that your upper edge is hemmed, now we can turn in the remaining 3 sides of the pocket. So you can do your sides first if you like. Do those 2 vertical sides, turn in 5/8 of an inch. And then finally the lower edge, 5/8 of an inch. And because you don't want the seam allowances to show on the sides, you can kind of cheat those corners in as you're pressing at the top too, just to make sure that you don't see any, seam allowance popping up over the top of your pocket. Okay, so there's your pocket ready to be sewn to your pant. So let me grab my pant back. And I've already completed a couple steps on the pant back here. I sewed my dart and pressed it towards center back, okay? You've seen me sew a lot of darts, so we went ahead and sewed that one already. And the other thing I want to mention too is if you're doing the decorative only front flap, then you would have applied your stabilizer to the center back opening above the zipper mark, okay? But I'm not doing that version, so no need to apply that stabilizer there. But what I am going to do is turn it over now, and you can see that I have 4 little dot marks for my pocket. So each of the corners should just meet those little circle marks. And then we're going to pin the pocket in place. And this pocket is just applied flat. You know, some of our pockets we build ease into so that you have room to put lots of stuff in them. But this one is just a flat pocket, so it should just meet those marks and be flat on the pant. Okay, so now I'm going to top stitch around the pocket, starting at this edge and doing those 3 sides of the pocket. And you're going to want to be sure to back stitch, you know, front and back a couple times at this upper corner. Just go back and forth a couple times to make sure that it's very secure there. That's an area that gets a lot of wear on a garment. That's why jeans have like rivets and stuff at that corner. So you want to make sure that your stitching is very secure there. Another thing you can do is do a bar tack. You know, you can, that's like a very heavy zigzag right on that corner. So you can go back and apply a bar tack there if you want. You want a very rugged sailor pant. So I'm just stitching right on the edge of the fold here. Okay, so I'm just going to trim my threads here. Now I have a cute little patch pocket. So in the next few steps, we're going to be putting the pant leg together. Okay, so now we are ready to sew each individual pant leg on the inseam and the outseam. So you're going to take your pant back and then your pant front, and you're going to put them right sides together. And I'm going to pin them together along the outseam first, and then the inseam. And then I'm going to sew both of those seams at 5/8 of an inch. So I'm doing the cropped version today, so it fits easily on my ironing board here, which is nice. All right, and now I will do the inseam, just pinning this. So it's a good idea to match the upper edge, so the crotch, and then the hem, and do a pin at each. And then you can match your notch, and then the rest of the seam. So just kind of divide each section with a pin as you go. Okay, so we're ready to sew both of those seams at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, now we are ready to press those seams open. So if you have a sleeve board or a seam roll, something that you can put inside your pant legs, that's pretty handy. so that we can press these seam allowances open. Just be careful not to press any folds into your pants around the inseam near the crotch because it's quite curved there. Okay, now I'm just going to flip it over and press open the outseam. Okay, now we're getting up to the hip, which is where I kind of like to do a little combo action with the sleeve board and the ham, because you have the hip curve here, so it can be really nice to have the curve of the ham to press on. Okay, so that is one pant leg complete, which I would recommend turning right side out now. And I have my other one here ready to go. So you're going to take both pant legs and you're going to sew them together at the crotch seam. So let me get this out of the way. Okay, so you're going to locate your inseam here. And I'm going to start by matching the inseam points, making sure those seam lines match exactly. And now, because I am doing the functioning front flap version, I'm going to sew this entire crotch seam from back to front in like a U shape, right? But if you're doing the non-functioning version, then you're going to need to leave an opening for your zipper in the back, okay? So you're going to need to leave this open from the zipper mark up, okay? So just keep that in mind if you're doing that version. But I am not doing that version, so I'm going to just sew this entire seam. Now it's very important when you get to the front, you will have these front facings here. You need to leave these out of your stitching. So just pin the pant fronts to each other. Okay, so I'm sewing at 5/8 of an inch the entire crotch curve. Okay, so that is the entire crotch seam sewn. Now you can see these pockets are still open here. The center front of the facing is still open. The next thing I'm going to do off camera is I'm going to finish these seam allowances as one on my serger, trimming to 3/8 of an inch, and then press them to one side, doesn't matter which, okay? So go ahead and finish that crotch seam allowance, and then we're gonna come back and move on to the next step. Okay, so now that we have assembled the pant legs and crotch, The next thing we're going to do is take care of this center front facing that's still loose here. So what you're going to do is flip that front facing to the outside of the pant, put it right sides together. This is a little funny here, the way you do this, because you just kind of flip it to the outside of the pant here. And now we're going to stitch this center front seam on the facing. And this will give us a nice clean finish on the inside of the pant. Okay, now we can press this open, this seam allowance open. And now we're going to flip the facing back right side out. I find this part very satisfying because you can see how nicely finished it looks on the inside and the outside. Okay, so let me just press this flat real quick. And then last thing for this part is to just baste this edge together, these two edges of the facing and the pant front, just so that they are not flopping around when we're trying to apply the waistband. There we go. So next step, and you can see how it's coming together here, which I really like. You can see the underlap for the buttons on the sailor flap, and then here how it's going to close like that. So next thing we're going to focus on is the waistband. Now we're going to focus on just the front waistband. So the waistband is sewn in separate parts, okay? So for both versions, flap version or zipper version, you are going to be doing the same steps here. So you're going to grab your waistband front. It's this shorter piece, rectangular piece, has button marks here, buttonhole marks, I guess, technically. So you have one that's interfaced and one that isn't. And we're going to put them right sides together. And we're going to stitch around these three sides. And the trick to this waistband is that you need to start and stop 5/8 of an inch in when you start stitching. So let's imagine I'm going to go over the machine and I'm going to put it in this way. I'm going to give myself a little mark here where I start stitching. So 5/8 of an inch in. Isn't this ruler cute? I love this tiny ruler. Okay, so I'm going to start stitching there, and then I'm going to end my stitching same right here. Okay, so that's going to keep these seam allowances open so that we're able to apply the waistband to the pants. Okay, so those little dots are just to remind me to stop and start stitching. So I'm starting at my first dot, I'm going back to my regular stitch length. I'm pivoting at each corner. And then ending at my next dot I made. Okay. grabbing some scissors, and I'm going to, this is going to be my outer waistband, the one with the interfacing. So the one without the interfacing is technically the waistband facing, so that's the one that I'm going to grade slightly shorter when I trim these seam allowances. And then the interface seam allowance is slightly wider. And now you can just trim away the excess in those corners. And now we will turn this right side out. A little point presser here to just kind of gently turn out those corners. Don't get too aggressive with it. And now we can press this flat. And you want to kind of try to roll the seam line to the wrong side, so that we're not seeing that seam line on the edge. Okay, so now we have this cute little front waistband piece, and we're going to sew this to the pant front. So let me grab my pants. Get this out of the way. All right, so I'm gonna be working with my pant front facing up. And now I'm going to put my waistband, the interface side, right sides together with the pant front. And you're keeping the inner waistband seam allowances free here. And we're going to stitch along this upper horizontal edge here. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to stitch this at 5/8 of an inch, and just making sure that these seam allowances are turned out of the way. All right, now we are going to grade these seam allowances, or trim them down really, I guess. So you can do them in separate layers. I would say the pant should be the shorter layer, and then the waistband would be the taller one when you grade. Okay. And now we will be able to flip the waistband up and turn in the seam allowance on the inside to get a nice clean finish on the inside. So just make sure that no little raw edges are showing here. And now we are going to press this flat. Okay, and you can see how nice and neat this looks on the front too. Okay, so now we have some top stitching to do. The first line of top stitching I'm going to do is along this lower edge of the waistband. And this is going to serve a couple purposes. First, it will kind of pull everything together because we have visible top stitching throughout this design. Secondly, we're going to catch the seam allowance, this free seam allowance underneath and secure it. So we don't have to do any slip stitching or anything on the inside of these pants. Okay, so now that I've pinned that down, I'm going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from this edge. My machine does not want to do this. Okay, so I'm stitching along about 1/8 of an inch from the from the seam line. And then I'm also catching that free seam allowance on the inside. The next thing to do, and this is, the steps are different. This is kind of where things veer off in very different directions depending on if you're doing the flap version or the zipper version. Okay, so I'm going to be focusing really just on the flap version from here on out. So if you're doing the zipper version, make sure to go back to your instructions. But what I'm going to be doing next is just top stitching along this upper edge, right? So from here, it's connecting the stitching at that inner corner and then going around this upper edge. If you were doing the zipper version, this is where you would connect these two pieces, okay? So I am just focusing on the flap version. So like I said, go back to your instructions if you're not sure on the zipper version. But what I'm gonna do is start my edge stitching at this inner corner, keeping that facing free, and I'm starting where my last line of stitching ends so that they look somewhat seamless. Okay, so I have finished the front waistband section. Everything is nice and top stitched. And in the next section, we're going to be talking about how to do the remainder of the waistband. All right, now we are moving on to the rest of the waistband. And again, these instructions are just for the front flap version. Okay, so for this version, you are going to have 2 back waistbands that are interfaced and 2 that are not interfaced. And both of these sets need to be seamed together at the center back, which has a notch. It's the short end with a notch on it. So I'm going to pin both of these short ends, stitch a 5/8 of an inch, and press open. Okay. Okay, so let's press these open. Okay, so now we're going to put these two right sides together. And believe it or not, the process is pretty much the same as what we just did for the front waistband, even though these are very different shapes and sizes than that little front waistband. But same idea, we are going to stitch along the two short ends and the upper edge, leaving the waistline edge free, and we're going to start and stop at 5/8 of an inch, leaving those seam allowances open so that we can stitch it to the pant. All right, so go ahead and stitch your waistband, just remembering to stop and start 5/8 of an inch from that lower edge. Okay, and again, same thing as with the center front waistband. We are going to be trimming the non-interfaced side shorter, grading it shorter, and then the interface side of the waistband is slightly taller. So I'm going to continue with the grading. Okay, and just trim away from the corners. And the other thing I would say on this is because there is a slight inner curve to the upper edge of the waistband, you can do a few little clips throughout. It's not super curved, but it will help it lay a little bit flatter if you do a few clips. About every inch or so should be fine. Okay, now we're going to turn this right side out. You can use your point presser again to get nice crisp corners. And normally this upper edge of the waistband we would understitch, right, to get this to lay the way we want it to. But because the entire waistband is top stitched, we're not going to understitch. So that means we need to do more pressing than we would if we were understitching. So just be, especially with this curve here, just be very deliberate, take your time with this, making sure that we're not going to see this seam line on the edge of the waistband, so you can kind of roll it in slightly as you're pressing. Okay, so just continue pressing like that. so this waistband will go from the edge of this cut-on extension that we did way back in the very first step today, all the way around to the other side like that, sort of like wraps around from the front to the back. Okay, so again, we left this seam allowance open so that you can easily pin this, and you have a notch to match to your cut-on extension where you did the stitching for that button extension. So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes pinning. I have a notch to match to my side seams here, so make sure your seam allowances stay open and pin there. And then we have the center back seam on the waistband matches the center back seam on the pant, and so on. So just continue around, taking a little time to pin. Make sure your darts remain pressed to center back, and just continue to pin like this. Okay, and now that I have pinned the entire waistband on, I'm going to go to my machine and stitch it at 5/8 of an inch. And again, just make sure that you keep this seam allowance up and out of the way. We don't want to stitch the inner waistband at all. Okay, and again, same steps as with the front waistband. We are grading the waistline seam allowances. The pant can be the shorter one and the waistband is the taller one. So I'm going to go around and continue to grade these seam allowances. Okay. Next step is to press that seam allowance up that we just sewed. And then I kind of like to do these next two steps at the same time, is that you press the waistline seam allowance up towards the waistband. I'm like, well, since I'm here, I might as well turn in the waistband seam allowance to enclose those raw edges, and then press that as I go. And then this part I pin from the right side because we're going to be stitching from the right side, because we're going to be edge stitching this waistband all the way around, all four sides. Okay, so I'm going to continue with the pressing. It's going to take me a few minutes. So just continue pressing that waist seam line up and then enclosing the seam allowances with the waistband and pinning. Okay, now that I'm pinned, I'm going to top stitch all the way around all four sides of the waistband. Again, catching this free edge of the inner waistband in my stitching. Okay, so now we have waistbands are totally finished. And now we just have some finishing work left to do. Okay, so now that you have completed your waistband, it's really just finishing work left. So we're gonna be focusing on the flap version yet again. So if you did the zipper version, make sure you refer to your instructions for the finishing steps, like the hook and bar on your waistband, etc. But for the flap version, the next steps are really focusing on the buttonholes and the buttons. So you can see we've given you these circle marks for your buttonholes, and your button is going to start right at that circle and then go inward towards center front. So it actually goes pretty far towards center front here, especially since we use those big 1 1/8" buttons. Okay, so you can play around with the number of buttons you use. You might have noticed that on the red hot pant version, I used only 3 buttons and just spaced them out evenly down to the bottom of the flap. So that's an option too, just if you want a different look. So you're gonna go ahead and just according to your machine's directions, you're going to make your buttonholes starting at that circle, going inward. And then on the flap underneath, the underlap, you are going to sew the corresponding buttons, okay? So buttonholes, buttons, and then the last thing is the hem. So just like for a lot of our more casual hems, you are going to turn the bottom edge up 5/8 of an inch and then top stitch at 1/2 inch. And that is it for your finishing work. Okay, everyone, that is it, your ginger sailor pants. I hope you loved sewing along today. I'm so excited that we finally got to do this functional sailor flap on a pant, which is a totally new skill for us here on Patreon. And I hope now that you've seen how to sew the pattern, you will go forth and make all the different lengths and versions, but I'm really excited to see how you interchange it with our other patterns to make jumpsuits and rompers. So have so much fun with this pattern, and thank you all for watching, and of course thank you for being patrons. I hope you love this new pattern. I will see you next time. Goodbye.